So Donald Trump uninvited Canada from his little club. I know everyone's really shocked. The man who's been calling Canada America's 51st state. He refers to the prime minister by his first name. He basically decided that Canada is not welcome anymore in the billion-dollar club. And of course, the Canadian media is going to run with this, right? They're going to say it's, tensions are rising. It's a diplomatic tiff. Trump is lashing out. He's the big baby. But, those are just headlines. They're sensationalism. And I want to read you what Trump actually wrote. He said, "Dear Prime Minister Carney, please let this letter serve to represent that the Board of Peace is withdrawing its invitation to you regarding Canada's joining what will be the most prestigious board of leaders ever assembled at any time." This is not Canada being strong. This is Canada being left out of a group it desperately needs to be a part of. And I'll tell you why. The most prestigious board of leaders ever assembled at any time in human history, according to Donald Trump. Okay. Now, this is a table of, Avengers, technically, the Avengers of geopolitics, and they just snapped Canada out of existence. But here's the thing, and I really just need you to hear this. This really isn't about Trump's ego. It never was. The story is about, and it's not even about a diplomatic tiff. The story is about what they desperately, desperately don't want us paying attention to. So I just want to back it up for a second and look at what actually happened here. Mark Carney, obviously, is Canada's prime minister, for those just tuning in. He went to Davos. Davos hosts the World Economic Forum. It's basically a gathering of billionaires. They fly on their private jets. They lecture the world about their carbon footprint, and then they discuss the future of humanity for us all. Now, Carney gave a speech at this meeting, and I'll give him this. The speech was good. It obviously went viral. People noticed. He talked about how we're living through a rupture, not a transition. He said that great powers are using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion. He's obviously referring to Donald Trump. He warned that middle powers like Canada need to stick together or end up on the menu. He actually said on the menu, and that was a great line. I'll give him that one for free. But he also said, this is actually really important. He said, the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. Well, thanks after screwing up Canada for the last 10 years. Now, again, he didn't name Trump. Politicians never talk directly to other politicians unless you're Donald Trump. They kind of just describe perfectly somebody specifically, and then they pretend they're speaking in abstract. It's like this whole art form that they do. But Trump, again, being Trump, had no problem targeting Mark directly and not speaking in circles. And he said Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched Prime Minister yesterday, Prime Minister Carney, and he wasn't grateful. And this is the part everyone's talking about. He said, Canada lives because of the United States. He said, remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. Well, yeah, at the end of the day, Carney was speaking in circles, and maybe we just need to speak directly to who we're speaking to really move things along. But I want you to marinate this for a second, okay? Because Carney obviously fired back to that. He had no choice. He said, Canada thrives because we are Canadian. He said, we are masters in our home. We're, and yeah, that on the surface sounds very dignified. He's trying to stand up for Canada. But, what's the real story here? What's the real story here? Yeah, obviously, Carney clapped back. He has to at this point. But everybody's watching this professional political match. But here's the thing. Why is Mark Carney lecturing the world about great powers using coercion when he literally just got back from Beijing, cut deals with Xi Jinping? This isn't ancient history. This was just last week. And Carney flew to the biggest security threat by his own admission and tried to strike a trade deal, lowering tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, which are basically modern day spy cars coming onto our road. In exchange, China's lowering tariffs on our canola. So I just want to get this straight. Carney goes to Davos and he says countries need to resist coercion from superpowers. And then he goes to China and he gives better access to our market. Then Trump gets mad and somehow Trump is the bad guy. Look, I'm not here to defend Donald Trump. The man, he speaks in all caps. He thinks Greenland is a great real estate opportunity. But we can at least acknowledge the irony here, the cognitive dissonance, the fact that, Mark Carney is not helping Canada at all. and the sheer audacity of lecturing the world about standing up to bullies while you're literally shaking hands with the Chinese Communist Party, all because you don't want to deal with Donald Trump and maybe you don't like what he has to say. And before anyone says we need to diversify our trade, yes, obviously we do, but diversify toward China, the country that our own intelligence agencies have called the most comprehensive security threat facing Canada today, the country that the Hague Commission, that's our own public inquiry, called the most active perpetrator of foreign interference targeting Canada's democratic institutions. That's your diversification out of the frying pan into the wok. Which brings me to the part of this story that nobody really wants to talk about. And again, I'm going to just hammer this home because Chinese interference is not a conspiracy theory. It just moves us more towards having a covert communist system in Canada. It's not about paranoia. It's about small steps that lead us all to one place. And that place isn't anywhere good. And I don't think anyone today that's experiencing the freedom, whatever's left of it in Canada, has to offer whatever opts for communism. But let me give you some quotes. These aren't just from fringe websites. They are from CSIS, the Hague Commission, and the Communications Security Establishment. CSIS said, and that's our spy agency, they basically said that Beijing views Canada as a high priority target for foreign interference. Now, you may ask yourself why? Because we're part of the Five Eyes, the intelligence alliance, and because Canada has a robust reputation that can be used or co-opted to help legitimize Chinese Communist Party interests. Read that again. They're not just stealing our technology. They're using our good name, our credibility. We're not just a target. We're a useful idiot, as they say. The same report said Chinese agents view their activities in Canada as low risk, high reward. Low risk. Let that sink in. And we have a prime minister who's now alienating us from our greatest democratic ally. And based on the evidence, I mean, can you really blame them? The whole commission, the official public inquiry, concluded that China interfered in our 2021 federal elections. Not maybe, but definitely they absolutely did. China obviously targets all levels of government in Canada, federal, provincial, municipal. They do not discriminate. They are equal opportunity subversion. The Communications Security Establishment, our cyber intelligence agency, released a report in October of 2024 saying that at least 20 government networks had been compromised by Chinese state-sponsored hackers. 20, not 2, 20. So their assessment, China is the most comprehensive cybersecurity threat facing Canada today. Their scale and ambitions are second to none. The head of the CSE, Caroline Xavier, was asked what keeps her up at night. And she said, pick the page. You know, she actually said that. She said, pick the page. And what's our response been? A couple of expelled diplomats, some stern words, a public inquiry that took years to produce a report that basically said, yeah, it's bad. Someone should do something. And I'm just saying, you know, our prime minister, instead of just going and dealing with Trump and finding a way to deal with what would be a difficult man who views the United States as in a certain light, you basically just trade Canada over to a country that is literally trying to destroy us from the inside out. I mean, they use espionage, like how Huawei mysteriously rose to global dominance. But sure, you know, let's just blame Trump. It's Trump's fault for what he says. Right? Now, I want to bring up a book, okay? It's called None Dare Call It Treason. It was actually written by John Stormer in 1964. I suggest you find this book and read it if you're interested, but the book was about America during the Cold War. Stormer's thesis was that the United States was losing ground to communism, not through military defeat, but through what he called the betrayal of elites, infiltration of institutions, the slow erosion of national sovereignty dressed up as international cooperation. The title comes from an old poem by Sir John Harrington. Treason doth never prosper. What's the reason? Why, if it prosper, none dare call it treason. Now think about that for a second. If the betrayal succeeds, it gets rebranded. It's not treason anymore. It's policy. It's progress. It's the way things are now. Sounds like a lot like Mark Carney's speech, doesn't it? Now, Stormer was writing about the Soviet Union, different era, different enemy, but the framework, the pattern, well, that sounds pretty damn familiar to me. It's about gradual infiltration, targeting of institutions, universities, media, political parties, exploitations of open societies, a sluggish, almost willfully blind response from those in power, which is what we have seen in Canada for the last 30 years. We have Tim Hortons and universal health care and passive aggressive politeness. We're not North Korea. But I'm saying that the tools of soft authoritarianism are being normalized. And I am saying that when those tools are deployed while foreign influence operations continually largely unaddressed, you have to start asking who benefits. In a country like Canada, there's just no place for that. People labeled as extremists, fringe, elements, anything to avoid engaging with their actual concerns. That's simply not a healthy democracy. Online censorship, expanding disinformation, basically a word that conveniently means whatever the government doesn't want you to say. Media increasingly dependent on government subsidies when the people paying your bills are the people you're supposed to hold accountable. What do you think happens to accountability? Surveillance expanding, digital ID systems, okay? They're rolling out every year, a little more monitoring, a little less privacy, always good for good reasons, of course, safety, security, public health, trust us. And through all of this documented foreign interference gets a shrug, some headlines, a commission, a report, and then back to business as usual. Because the people, we are not holding the politicians accountable. We're expecting them to somehow lead us into the right path. It's just not going to happen. The people need to actually hold the government accountable. And that's what we stopped doing. When your intelligence agencies are screaming that you're being targeted, compromised, infiltrated, and the response is a long inquiry followed by a longer yawn, then something is very wrong. So here's my third proposition, and I know this is going to ruffle some feathers. People are going to comment, they're not going to like it. But what we're watching isn't a trade dispute. It isn't a diplomatic spat. It's a great power realignment. And some would call it the early stages of Third World War. Not fought with tanks and bombs, but with tariffs and technology and information. Carney himself used the phrase New World Order. His words, not mine. He said, we are living through a rupture. So figure it out, figure out what that means. And you know what I think the rupture is? The United States, they saw the writing on the wall years ago. They watched as Canada and other Western nations got increasingly cozy with China, economically entangled, technologically dependent, institutionally penetrated. They're not stupid. They watched as Five Eyes partners, their closest intelligence agencies, became potential liabilities, leaky buckets, security risks, and now they're drawing the line. So this isn't about Mark Carney coming to save the day for Canada. This is about Trump recognizing what Canada has done to its own people. I'm sorry, that's just my opinion. And they're trying to carve themselves out of this while Carney is just digging us deeper into it.